corporations work. The shares are the votes.
Yeah.
Friedberg, update us on, the Ukraine is in month 2 now. I'm sorry, Ukraine is in month 2. Sorry for putting the before it. It's a tough habit to break. Friedberg, tell us, the second order, third order effects of fertilizer and food at this point. We've had this back and forth. And now I think the world is starting to realize, hey, Friedberg was right. These downstream effects are going to be significant. I asked you a question about these, which is, can the world not mobilize if these are about 1% of the calories, 20 or 30% of the calories in a certain country? Could the world not mobilize to find other caloric sources, rice, fish, soybeans, whatever? Or is our system so fragile that we can't rally around sending food to anywhere on the planet, despite the fact that we can fly anywhere and go on vacation for 2 weeks anywhere on the planet?
No, the food system is complex and efficient, but it does not have strong redundancy or malleability. So take, for example, how do you get flour? You get flour in your food from a food company that bought the flour from a miller. There are mills around the world that process wheat into flour. You can't take that same mill and process corn into flour. There's different technology, different equipment that's used. Same with soybeans and so on. So when you look at how the food supply chain is constructed, there's a local point of consumption, which is a store. Then there's a food processor, and you work your way kind of up the supply chain. And there's a certain input that's required to make the output that people consume. And so calories, while they might be fungible, practically speaking, or fundamentally speaking, they're not necessarily fungible, practically speaking, on the ground. When you actually try and plug in, let's say, soybeans into the milling supply chain to make the pasta or the bread that everyone consumes in Tunisia, it's not going to work. And the same is true with rice. And then the more important dynamic force that's underway is that these markets for food and commodities globally are not controlled by government. They're controlled by private businesses. And there's a market for these products. And so what happens is, as the food supply chain threat hit, countries like China and others started to stockpile. They started to buy lots and lots of supply, drive up their stocks and their reserves, for fear of the famine that's about to hit us in about 9 months. And when they did that, there was now less food available to Tunisia and to Eritrea and to Egypt and so on. And so we're starting to see the effects of that dislocation driving dynamic market forces where certain buyers stock up, and then the folks that can't afford to step in not being able to acquire product and being left. So not only do we have a local production differential that makes it hard to have all calories be fungible, we're also seeing this dynamic where there's a bifurcation where the haves have more and the have-nots have less. And that's going to really make this famine kind of hit home in a really, really sad way in the months to come. We're already seeing, as I mentioned 2 weeks ago, as I mentioned a few weeks ago, the fertilizer problem driving acreage down. So the USDA farm report comes out. They survey farmers and figure out how much they're going to plant every year. And they just downgraded the number of corn acres that are going to get planted this year, which is happening starting this month, from 93 million acres to 89 million. That doesn't sound like a lot, but 4 million acres.
Yeah.
4 million acres coming out of production of corn in the US is an incredible amount of calories that are not going to be planted to corn. And so that has all these downstream effects. And again, this crop doesn't come to harvest till, September, October. Then it's going to get processed and it turns into food. So by the time the effect of this decision-making hit the marketplace, the availability of calories and the stockpiling that's going on, it's like, boom, some countries are going to be, they're going to have a limited budget. They're only going to be able to access so much food and they can't access any. And other countries are going to be fine. The United States is going to be fine. Western Europe will be fine. China will be fine. Sri Lanka is going to be a mess. Northern and Eastern Africa is going to be a mess. I mean, there's like places around the world that we are going to have to scramble. I don't have a real easy answer. There's no simple plug and play here. It's going to be a really complex set of problems that are going to need to be solved.
Well, Sri Lanka does grow a lot of its own food, so they may be okay because
they're a net importer, right? I mean, they're a pretty big net importer. So they make a lot of food, but they rely on imports a lot for calories there. So yeah, I mean, and that's the case with a lot of places around the world. A lot of people think, oh, we have farmers, but most countries, particularly in the developing world, are net importers. They rely on third-party supplies of food. So
sure, but a lot of what you're talking about though are not They're processed foods that come into the country.
Sacks, anything to add here?
Well, I mean, I think that the Ukraine war is kind of entering a chronic phase. I mean, this sort of entering a new phase. The first phase, you'd have to say that the Ukrainians won. The Russia wanted to topple Zelensky's regime, maybe take Kyiv. They obviously failed in that. Now we're in this phase where the fighting is over in the Donbass. It's basically the civil war that's been going on there since 2014. And really, that's what it's now about. Zelensky has acknowledged that Ukraine will not be part of NATO. So that issue is kind of off the table. And so what they're really fighting over now is the status of these disputed territories in eastern Ukraine. And I think it's going to go on for a long time. That's what General Milley testified. It could go on for years. I think it's going to become a sort of permanent feature in the background of Biden's presidency. And I think the good news is that hopefully the World War III aspect is off the table. It seems like the calls for us to impose a no-fly zone or to put boots on the ground, which you were hearing a lot of a few weeks ago, seems like that's off the table. So now it's just going to be a protracted, I think, civil war going on in the Donbass between Ukraine and Russia and their proxies.
Which would mean, Sacks, correct me if I'm wrong, that Putin will be hobbled forever. They're not going to be a world power, and his power is going to deprecate because he's going to be busy fighting this non-winnable war for some period of time, which is in a way saying Biden did it perfectly and checkmated him. I'm saying that's going to be your assessment if this does go down this way, that there's like a civil war going on and Putin is crippled. That would be checkmate or no?
I think that clearly the State Department's strategy here is to make Putin bleed in eastern Ukraine and to protract this thing and make it go on as long as possible. I think that's a risky strategy because this thing could always spin out of control.
It's risky, but could it be effective? Is there a chance it could be effective?
Well, I mean, if the goal is to bleed Putin, yes, it could be effective at bleeding Putin. However, I don't know that needed to be the key geostrategic objective of the United States right now.
Okay,
I don't know because look, China is our main threat. China is a peer competitor to the United States. Russia is not. Our economy is 15 times bigger than Russia's. China's economy is about the same size as ours. That is the real threat. So, there are costs to us as well. There are clearly costs to Putin of this, but there are huge costs to us as well. Friedberg described the risk to the supply chain. We've had to now spend a lot more money building up the defense in Europe. We're going to be pinned down in Europe. We should really be moving some of those resources from Europe to East Asia. I mean, that's really where the pivot to Asia is what we thought we were supposed to be doing until quite recently. Now we're going to be bogged down there. And there's still risks of inflation and recession in the U.S. And I think if we are in a recession later this year, I think a lot of people in the U.S. will be asking, what was this all for? And if you go read my article that just came out yesterday, that was based on my speech, is published in the American Conservative. Look, this war was easily avoidable. I mean, the State Department could have avoided this war very easily.
I listened to your speech. I thought your points that you were very clear on, hey, Putin started this. He is the aggressor. It's his responsibility. But, we do need to think about our foreign policy as a country, and regime change is probably not a winning strategy for us. Although in this case, it seems like it's a possibility now. So who knows? I
don't think we're going to get regime change. But if we do, there's no reason to believe that we're going to get something much better. In every case where we've pushed for regime change, we've actually gotten the same or worse. I don't think that should be our objective. I think we have a bunch of bad options now that the war's already started. The best option would have been to avoid this war in the first place. And if this thing drags on for years and the U.S. economy tips into recession, people will look back and say, why didn't Joe Biden's State Department in the year 2021 do a much more effective job preventing this war?
Let me ask this follow-up question as we wrap here. Chamath, I've been thinking about what should a strategic objective be for America? And the number one strategic objective I could think of was, or one of the top ones would be to build a strong relationship with India, which obviously, it has an adversarial relationship with China already on the border of Pakistan. And then obviously, has relations with Russia. What would be on the top of each of your lists, Sacks and Chamath? Chamath, you go first, on priority here. If we're thinking fresh, looking at the world with China in retreat, sort of disengaging from the West with Russia on their heels. What could the United States and the West do as a preemptive measure to really solidify democracy and, the world order, a peaceful world order?
I'll answer it slightly differently, which is we need to put ourselves in a position to not be dependent on any country, because then we can actually dictate what we think the right approach and solution is from first principles and have the courage to stick it through to get to the other side of it. So there are really two things we need to do. The first, which we've kind of perverted unnecessarily, is energy independence. And we've allowed too many people to conflate and muddy the water on what energy independence means. Nobody was ever advocating for coal, but the amount of coal that we could have burned as a bridge fuel to LNG, which could have been a bridge fuel to things like nuclear and wind and solar, that path was pretty clear, but we got in our own way. We have to get out of our own way. Okay? So energy independence, I think, beyond anything else,
strategic,
probably an order of magnitude, it is the most important thing. And then secondarily, there are certain areas for the future of those future economies where we need to have complete capability and know-how. And the most important ones there are the specialty chemicals that we need to basically support climate change writ large, to support battery production writ large, and then semiconductors. Get those two things completely under US control, on top of energy independence, and honestly, we would be a dominant world power for the next 200 years on our terms.
So the road to resiliency. Sacks, you're now the Secretary of State. What are your key priorities?
The U.S. grand strategy has always been to prevent the rise of a pure competitor who can dominate their region and then challenge us for global hegemony. There's only one country in the world that can do that right now to us, which is China. So the pivot to Asia, as Obama said, was fundamentally correct, but we have not followed through and executed it. And now our attention is distracted and bogged down by what's happening in Europe. I would seek a negotiated settlement to this war. Now that the Zelensky government has survived, Putin has been unable to take Western Ukraine, and furthermore, that Zelensky has given up being part of NATO. The only thing left is this fight in the Donbass. There's an agreement already on the table called the Minsk Accords that could allow us to settle that. Meanwhile, pivoting to Asia, wrap it up. Meanwhile, pivot to Asia, create a strong alliance of countries in East Asia who are threatened by China. We already are friends with many of them. You've got Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, you've got Vietnam. Create a balancing alliance of those countries to prevent China from rising to the point where it can threaten us for global hegemony. That should be our main priority geopolitically.
Great. All right, there you have it, folks. For the Rain Man, David Sacks, the dictator, Chamath Palihapitiya, and the Sultan of Science, David Friedberg, I'm your boy, J. Cal, and we will see you all in Miami, May 15th, 16th, and 17th.
Love you, boys.
Bye-bye. Love you, besties.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
We'll let your winners ride.
Rain Man, David Sacks.